Hello everyone, I hope you are uncommonly well. Welcome to Homemakers Radio. If you are new here, please go click the link in the description box and go over to the post on which I have embedded this and read the summarization and see some other photos if I ever get around to putting them there. But you can leave a comment there if you want to. I don't have comments on the channel, and being very busy and making this for people who want to work while they listen, I didn't really try to encourage people to spend too much time commenting, because then you have to stop and do that. And I know I have things that I love to listen to. I'm saving a few things that came in on my email to listen to that I've subscribed to. So when I work on that room back there and other things, I can do tedious work, and it flies by when you have someone to listen to. And especially to some of you women who are home alone, because I think that a lot of people are home alone when they were used to going out, going to work, going to be with friends, and for some reason find themselves alone. And that it's nice to have someone to listen to. And if you would like to go and get yourself ready and get dressed, I always propose that first thing, because it's an exercise in self-discipline. It also tells your little mind that we are going to get serious about some things in life today, and that the home is a serious place, and that what you're doing is very, very important, beyond what I can even describe. I told you last time I spoke here how I thought it was quite phenomenal that the Bible spoke of women at home. And when it speaks of the Proverbs 31 woman, or any other, is it Titus 2, and then is it 1 Timothy and or 2 Timothy, where it talks about women being to keep the home, that it doesn't speak very often of any other kind of industry for women. And although it does mention some things, it really is emphatic about what they need to be doing at home, as to guard it and to guide it and to keep it. And in the olden days back in the land of Canaan, they had a custom of leaving a light on in a windowsill to indicate that someone was occupying the place. And it was very important because it kept thieves and lurkers away. No one wanted to go near a house where there was a light on. And remember, in Proverbs 31, it says her lamp does not go out at night. And that was part of the custom. It's alluding to that purpose, that it was there to guard, to help guard the home. And in a way, the woman is the light of the home. Now, when I was growing up, women were mostly home, and they didn't visit all the time or waste all their time coffee clatching. That was not considered very worthy. And so, but they just knowing that someone down the hill from you on a piece of property, their light was on and the woman was home, that was a great comfort. You knew that people around you were home in case you ever needed them, and you were available for them too. And so today I am going to encourage you to get dressed and absolutely look your best. I've waited all day to come here, and that's why it is so dark. But I'm going to sit here in the dark, try to read my notes, and try to keep you encouraged while you work today. Now remember, anything I say is just my opinion. It's just here to entertain you while you work. You can, if I were sitting here in front of you and we were chatting away, you could throw out mentally half the stuff I said, because we were just chatting, and not take it too seriously. So make sure that what you do is suitable for you and your life. Things that I do, everybody's different, and things that I do, even when I mention homeschooling, that suited me and my children. Maybe it would be different for yours. So as I homeschool you, just take what you can and adapt it to your life if you want. But don't take it all too seriously, because the best book, of course, is the Bible, and your life has to be patterned after that. But one of the reasons that I'm doing this is that when I was really young, I could not find the women in the church obeying the scriptures that talk about women being at home and teaching the younger women to guide the home and to guard the home. And if you're a guard, you need to study guards sometime, because the Bible speaks of guarding as almost a military effort. And if it's a military effort, everyone's quite serious. They don't fall down on the job, and they don't leave their post, and they don't leave their houses open to deterioration or deteriorating or invasion. And so there's also the spiritual aspect of guarding the home. You've got to guard the minds and hearts of your family, your children, even your husband, because they can be in a weakened mental state sometimes just from the barrage of what the world is saying, and you'll have to have a sound mind so that you can keep them on track and show them what is right. So it's more than just guarding the physical house, but guarding the family and guarding their hearts and guarding their minds. And you'll be responsible for that. You might do something like check your mail that comes to the home and throw out half of it because you don't think that it's appropriate for the minds of your people to dwell on. There's nothing wrong with that. So when you are home, there's more going on there. There's more to it than just keeping house. And so when I say just keeping house, we aren't just keeping house, for in doing those things, in taking care of the home, there's a spiritual aspect to it. We're doing it because we want to please God and to make the best place available for the people that we are responsible for. It's not just, I'm just staying home because there's nowhere else to go. I'm staying home. There are no jobs out there. You're staying home because of what the Bible tells you to do, and because there's great protection there and reward for your efforts. Plus, you're building up a future for yourself and for your children. You're investing in their lives. And also, there's much more going on. There's nutrition. There are things that you can't get in the world. Remember, I read in Brian Kozlowski's book, The Jane Austen Diet, that they suffered from bad bread and bad water when they had to go to the city and get away from home, and that they often put ingredients in the bread that would make it rise fast or be puffier, and it was just no different than today. So if all you do is bake your own bread, you've done a great deal of service to your families and to their health. And do not buy the bread. If you do buy bread, have a look at the ingredients and see if you can find some of the things I mentioned before. One of them here in the States is datem, D-A-T-E-M, which is outlawed in some countries. And it's just all chemicals to make the bread soft and fluffy and make you just want to eat more. And so if all you do is bake bread and keep a clean house, you're doing a great service, and you will be richly rewarded because your family will not suffer the expense of people being out of work or away from work because they're not feeling well, always having a stomach ache, and then the extra work it takes for you to look after them. So the best preventative health is good nutrition and good rest and good water and a healthy, happy state of mind. I did read that book, Brian Kozlowski's book, The Jane Austen Diet, and he had a wonderful chapter called The Mind-Body Connection. I'd like to read that sometime again for you. I think, and when you start the day, it takes some kind of self-control to get up and get dressed up. I would like to challenge you to that today and ask you to get dressed up and get ready before you check your texts, before you check your phone, before you look on your computer for who's got the updated blog or the updated whatever. And also, speaking of that, and then, dress up to come to the table. Dress up to come to your desk. And dress up before you approach your family. Remember Mary Kay in her book about her cosmetic industry, how she said that she got up in the morning and went straight to her bathroom, and she did not come out of there until she was all dressed up. And her hair was done and her skin care was taken care of. She did not come out. And I think too often it's easy to be casual at home. And she didn't flop around in her slippers and her sweats all day. She was presentable when she came out of her house, and she had a home office and when she first started her business. But we have a business too, and that's the business of home. That's the business of keeping people that we love alive, people that God has put in our care. So I would like to challenge you to do that, to get dressed before you check anything, before you even look outside and see what kind of day it is. Because if you walk to the front door and you're not dressed, then there'll be something else you see, and then you'll go to the kitchen, and then pretty soon it's going to be an awful chore to try to figure out how you're going to take time out to get fully dressed. Now, one of the things I think it's really important to be mentally stable. The Bible talks about this, how we have to have sound mind and sound judgment. And to be mentally stable, I think it's really important to get rid of the media news. Now, this could be both the conservative and the liberal news, or the religious news too, because it can all be real disturbing. And what I would suggest you do is have your news be the news. Like, for instance, what's my menu going to be? What am I going to wear? Who do I have to write to or call today? Who do I have to call on? What sort of work do I have to do? What kind of creative work must I do? And what kind of talents am I pursuing? Am I going to take a music lesson? And that's all your news. It's like getting up and getting dressed and going to the computer and seeing your favorite physical therapist instructor or exercise instructor, and if she has a video up today with a 5-minute exercise, well, that's part of the news. That's part of your news, and it's healthy for you. And then you look at the cooking shows that you have subscribed to and see what the newest one is, and that's news too. So all these things are good for us, and so all your subscriptions are your news, but just make sure they're good subscriptions that have wholesomeness to them and help you with your home and your family. And of course, I have all of my favorites too. As you can see, it's getting darker here, but I'm going to plug along. There's nothing to see, but I do think, yes, I do have a teacup, and if you want to go now while you listen, you may. I don't know if you can see this because it's so dark here, but this is the teacup for today. It has a little bit of the aqua in it. A lot of people have made comments when they come to see me about my aqua decor and the coverings I put on everything. It's aqua, not turquoise. Now, turquoise is this dark bead here, this dark rock called turquoise here in the U.S. It's a Native American stone, and here, and it's called turquoise, and it's darker. Turquoise is much darker. This that I have decorated in is aqua, and even my lights are aqua. So what we want to do is make news out of ourselves. And so when I call my daughter or she calls me, I ask her what she's been doing and what she's going to do and what she would like to do, or what has occurred during the day for her, and what's on her schedule, because that's the news we need to hear. And so that's a way that we can wean ourselves off of the bad news that leave us so jumpy and upset all the time. And one of my children decided not to have any kind of information type political news of any flavor, and said that he just been living in bliss, mental bliss. And sometimes he gets it by accident. Sometimes someone tells him something, and he can feel the tension come immediately. And speaking of tension, I have been going through books. I just don't know if this will ever end. But I've been going through books, and I found this old one here. It's not an old one, but a lady named Victoria sent it to me, and it's Modern Essentials, and it was a book she wanted me to have so I could study about the effect of scent. And this focuses on essential oils and the plants in which they come from, and has beautiful illustrations of the olfactory system and the nervous system, and different things like that, and it's quite thorough. But I ran across something that I thought was very interesting that I thought I would read to you. Let me see if I can get it open to the right bookmark here. And so since I'm homeschooling you, I thought I like to learn a little bit about everything. I'm not into, I don't know how to do blends, and I don't want to have a business like essential oils, but I like to know about the effect that the plant or the scent has, because we probably have a lot of things around our own backyards that we don't realize it. But one part of the book was talking about orange oil, and I don't know if you remember when you were kids how you peel the orange and then you take it and you would squirt out this little scent here, and sometimes squirt it at each other, but it made a little scent. And I don't know if you can see that, but we amused ourselves quite a bit with these peelings because they squirted out this little scent. And part of the book that was talking about the effect of orange on you, the orange scent, and it's kind of like the happiness scent, was that it took 40 of these, just the peelings, not the orange, just the peelings, to make just a tiny bit of the oil, the scent. And then there's just oil in everything. If you'll notice, if you leave something like a leaf or something in water for a while, or a peel, that after a while you can see that there's a slight scum or oil on the top. And so how it took 40 of these peelings of these oranges, 40 oranges peelings, to make this little tiny vial of scent of essential oil. And so, but we have this stuff. We don't have to always think about having the oils, but if you really think about what we grew up as with children and what we did with it, we had a lot of this around. And so I wanted to read a page here from Modern Essentials, and I wanted to thank Victoria for sending it to me, although I don't know where she is now, because this was sent to me. Let me tell you when this was sent to me, and I've just now gotten around to reading a lot more. It was sent to me in 2014, and I have just now gotten to where I have the time to sit down and go through all of it, although I have seen a lot of the pages. I found one that I'd like to read to you while you work, and it's called Arabia, and I want to read this entry to you because you might find this quite interesting. Between 1000 BC and 400 BC, Arabia was the center of the lucrative spice trade route. And by the way, I want to thank the lady in Dubai who's studying Jane Austen history for sending me the museum pages of her history. I do intend to read those and read them aloud. And then someone else sent me a page or a link to Jane Austen's Religion, and I want to learn about that and probably read it to you. So, during this time, frankincense, between 1000 BC and 400 BC, Arabia was the center of a lucrative spice trade route. During this time, frankincense was by far the biggest trade commodity and brought great wealth to Arabia. The trade route extended from the Jufar region of Omar to Petra in Jordan, approximately 2,400 miles, and was commonly referred to as the Frankincense Trail. This trail was used so many times that modern-day satellite images still show faint marks in the ground where the camel caravans passed over. So I wanted to show you that, where a camera had caught the trade route, even though it's grown over. It can still be seen because it was used so many times. And even the land where we live, which was settled 100 years ago, every now and then we'll see an unusual path somewhere on a dry day when all the grass is all dried up. There'll be these marks that look like wagon wheel marks, and wonder about it, because a route that's used a lot will leave marks like that for years later. And I wanted to talk to you about that because in, there people are always speculating about these crop circles. Well, one time my kids and I were kind of researching this because we always think there's got to be maybe a deeper reason. And it was discovered, and we used to be able to get the film of it, the documentary about it, but I haven't seen it in a long time online. But it was a documentary about these crop circles that people used to speculate all the time about. And but as someone who had begun to do an archaeological dig around them found that there were bones from dogs that were typically sheep herder dogs, and also traces of crops and things that the sheep would have eaten in this circle, and that the dogs they speculated the other way, that the dogs had probably herded the sheep around in these circles, and that they were so well trod that they show up sometimes in dry weather. And but you can get information on that. It's just that I haven't seen it in a long time. The Arabs are also credited with being the first to discover steam distillation as a method of extracting essential oils from the plants around 1000 AD. The Arabian physicians Abu Ali Hussein, more commonly known as Avicenna, is said to be the inventor of this method of distillation. He distilled both essences and aromatic waters. Now, the aromatic waters are what's left over after the oils have been extracted out and been steamed out, and so then there's this scented water that's left, and you can buy those. They're not as strong, like if you touched them and you touched your eye or something, it wouldn't sting so much like an essential oil, but you can buy those a lot cheaper than the essential oil. I'm looking for things that I already have that are natural, like I have mint growing outside, and so I use those for what most people would use essential oils for. So I wanted to read that to you because I'll read a little bit more about, in Europe, with the invention of distillation, the use of aromatic essential oils in perfumes quickly migrated to Europe, and by the end of the 12th century, Europeans were distilling their own essential oils and manufacturing their own perfumes. When the Great Plague became widespread in Europe, fumigations and aromatics were often employed to try and drive the sickness from the cities. It was found that those who were most in contact with aromatics, especially the perfumers, were virtually immune to the plague, while so many died around them. In London, houses and workplaces were fumigated on a daily basis to try and keep away the plague. Frankincense was among the aromatics used for that. So this is interesting because when I started to look around a little bit in the stores for these essential oils, there were certain ones that the row of them was just totally gone, just empty. Others were around, other types of bottles of things were around, but there would be frankincense was all gone, and peppermint was all gone, and the cloves were all gone, cinnamon was all gone. Many of them were all gone. Not so much the perfume type, but these food types were being used. And then when I tried to order some, I ordered some grapefruit oil, and I had to wait on it because it was in such demand. So a lot of people are discovering, and have known for a long time, how important these are in preventing disease. So that's all I will read to you about that right now. And I do have several other things to talk to you about. Now, I had mentioned to you before about McGuffey's Readers, and I wanted to clear up something about that. And that was that this says 1836. Now, until the 1870s, the McGuffey readers were published by secularist type people. And so when the Christians got a hold of it and revised it in the 1870s, they were much nicer. And remember, I read to you this one that was called The Death of a Little Boy's Mother, and it was just went into this great detail, and it was just so sad I wouldn't even read it to a child. Well, make sure when you get one of these, you order the Christian School edition, because they got rid of a lot of that nonsense, and they made it quite a nice book. And I noticed this is the secular edition, but I noticed a page here that I didn't like, and it was so condemning of little children. And it said, and it told something that I didn't agree with. So I just want to tell you what I did here. It said, if you do well, everyone will love you. And what I will do is I will circle this, and then I will write a scripture, beware when all men speak well of you. And I will talk about how you can't expect that your family loves you. You love your children, and sometimes they get around other people, and even in your home. I've seen people that are really sneaky. They can say something real cruel to a child, even right under your nose, and the child is just crushed because he hasn't done anything wrong and he's been cruelly attacked. But you have to understand that that's not so. Just because you do well doesn't mean everybody's going to like you. So you have to correct that. It means God will approve of you, your parents will love you, and they're going to love you anyway. But in the secular editions, they make statements like this that are very they're not very kind, I don't think. And he talks about how there are bad children, and I always was taught that people do bad things, and but as people, God created them, and He created them for His to serve Him and to love their fellow human beings and to be part of a family. And when we teach them what their purpose is, we learn that some of these, not everything in a book is suitable to teach a child with. So what I would do, I will circle it, and then I'll put a scripture in there, and I'll actually write in the book. There are times, of course, if you find something you don't like in a homeschool book, you can just tear out the page, or you can paste something over it if it's a picture you don't like, or if it's an attitude. One time I ordered a book that I didn't like at all, and it had such a bad attitude in it that I decided not to use it at all. And there are ways of disposing of these without sending it out for other people to read. But not everything is good. You have to look over everything, and it gives me the determination that everybody should have a copybook or a notebook where they, like we used to call them, they were called, what were they called? I believe they were copybooks, and I've spoken of them several times. You can read about them on Wikipedia and other places where they have pictures of people's old copybooks, where they would just take a sentence from a book, a good sentence, and write that down, something they wanted to remember. We need to have our own curriculum and our own books for our children. And although some of these are pretty good and you can use them, you still have to be very discerning. And for instance, I don't care for, this is one of those wood block prints. It's not very pretty. I don't think it would appeal to a child. In fact, to me it's gloomy. Well, I would probably have them draw a picture and put that on there, or just in their copybook do something pleasant. But some of these are just not, to me, a good influence. I don't care for all of it. And so you have to use your own judgment. Now, just before all of this war that's going on, I have to remind everybody at home that you might feel a little bit more pressure, or a lot more pressure, or even a little sense of hopelessness. But before any of it happened, people still got depressed. People still got behind in their housework. People still had trouble with their relatives. People still, it's just like in Jane Austen's day, where Lydia ran away with Wickham. Everybody had one of those in their family. Before all this happened, people still had character problems, and people still suffered from their bad judgment. And so it's here's the thing. Good character is developed by reading and studying this and determining in your heart to do better and to correct certain things. And if you do that, then no matter what kind of distress comes upon you, you can still maintain your home and your family and take it in good stride. In fact, if you'll watch some of these old Jane Austen movies, you'll find that some of them became quite philosophical over some of the foolishness of other people. But before any of this was going on, where people were locked down and intimidated and threatened and told they had to do certain things in order to be admitted to society, before that there were still the same old problems. These problems don't happen because of duress or because of a war, because I think that if you'll develop good character, it won't matter what happens, you will still know what is good to do and what is right and how to guide the home and to guard the home. Just because there's a war going on doesn't mean you're going to be able to excuse people's lax behavior or their rudeness, and it doesn't mean that your duties, you don't sit around and wait for the war to be over before you clean your house, before you make it into a place of comfort. I think that everybody can turn their home into a fine inn that suits them and be living in a fine place. And thankfully, we are still able to do that. And so we have to turn it into a personal retreat and a place that the children love, a place that the family would love to come home to, and say, I am staying at the inn. And that's where I am right now. I've gone to the inn. Also, I think it's really important for the homemaker to keep a log as though she were on a ship. And if you would like to study ship's logs and what their purpose was, I did read a little bit about it from some woman's entry into one of the old Victoria magazines about how she decided to keep a journal because it charted her course. It showed her where she had been and where she was going, and it gave her a feeling of where she was right now, and also helped to stabilize her when there were the winds of diversity. And so that is really important too. And so it's very important, I think, to regard the home as something extremely important. And ladies, if you're not feeling well, and if you find you have to shut everything down and go to bed for a while, I think that you need to realize it's not going to shut your life down or shut everybody else's life down like it would. You're not going to lose your job. You couldn't do that in a working place, but you can do that at home. And you do sometimes have to take a day off to maintain your health. I think that's very important too. But it's not going to destroy anything if you decide that you need to have some rest. And so you have to learn about the things that will help to build you up, because you're going to be the one that builds up your family, and they'll depend on that. But I don't know if you can train them to build you back. And I thought of a really good phrase today where you're encouraging somebody in your home, or maybe just a friend, somebody you're talking to on the phone or texting, and say, now I've encouraged you. You just remember to encourage me when I need it. And I have thanked you for your help. And when you grow up, I'd like you to remember me and to include me in your life and to thank me for my help. And unfortunately, many women don't think of that because we're taught not to glory in ourselves and not to talk about ourselves too much. And I have grandkids I like so much that I want to ask them, what are you doing and what's going on? And they've been taught not to talk too much about themselves, So it's very hard to get any information out of them. I was talking to one the other day, and he wasn't giving me much information, and I said, "You're not a man of information, are you?" So now in raising children, I know a lot of you have young children, really young children at home, and that's just a glorious time to be home with them, because they will go and do what you do. They want to be with you. They want to be by your side, and you can teach them. But as they get older, sometimes it's going to become necessary to. Well, I think you should probably deliberately have a curriculum for them, and you go through here and you find all the young people that strayed away and all the young people that did right, so that they have a balance of comparison as to the ones that did right had good consequences, and the ones that strayed away and did wrong and were displeasing to God and to their families ended up in a bad way. And you can find Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and you can find all the sons of the prophets and other people in the Bible that had consequences. And it's very important to grow up with these kind of examples, because sometimes children don't correlate it to real life, and you have to say, this happens to other people even today. And some of the movies that I discovered that I think were quite valuable, but of course your children have to be old enough to discern this. And when you show your children a movie, see, the movies helped me because sometimes the books were very difficult to read if they were written in the 1800s. They really are hard to read. So we would read them after I already had learned what the theme was. And sometimes even Jane Austen, when I first started becoming interested in Jane Austen novels, I had to watch a film to get the basic idea of what it was, because there was so much conversation in the stories that I couldn't make it out as well. So sometimes you have to, before you show them something, you have to say, this is a story about this man, and he did this, and this is the result, and you need to watch it, because and it's no use saying, oh, I'm going to save the ending for last. You need to prepare them, and you need to tell them what's going on. Wives and Daughters, for example. It's a great story. It's about two girls that were stepsisters. One of them was rather silly. The other one was serious about life, and what became of them, and the turmoil that it caused, and tell them what's going on here, so that they can enjoy the movie and not have any really traumatic surprises, and tell them what happens here, because they're hard to make out sometimes. But if you want to help your children, I mentioned 4 things here that might be interesting. And I don't care for Charles Dickens that much, but I understand he was a cousin of Elizabeth Gaskell, who wrote Wives and Daughters and North and South, and I liked those stories. But the Old Curiosity Shop, I believe there were several different editions of the movie made from this story, the Old Curiosity Shop, and I'll just give you a very general idea of what it is and why it would help a young person. Because it talks about making bad judgments and going the wrong way, and how to fix other people. Because many times young people, even in a homeschool family, will think that they are free to do what they want to do, and that no one else should care what they do, but they don't realize how much they are loved. And if they make the wrong decisions, the family will be hurt, or they will miss them, or they can cause so much havoc in a family. And so they need to know how they affect the family. It's like when you toss a rock in the water, and wasn't there a poem, Drop a Pebble in the Water? and it goes in the middle, and even though it sinks, all these ripples go all around the shore, so it affects the shore. It affects everything around it. So the old curiosity shop was about a man who had an antique store, but he was rather foolish, and he had some friends, and they speculated and they gambled, and he owed them money, and pretty soon he lost the shop. But the shop was supposed to go, that was a living, that was supposed to go to his granddaughter, and she ended up having to, they were homeless, and she ended up having to walk around selling things, and it was so sad because of this man's foolishness, and how it had affected her and made her homeless. And so that's a very good movie to watch for young people, but not real little children, because it probably would be too sad. And the other one was, if you really want to teach a young man a good lesson, and a woman too, young woman too, because this was called Portrait of Dorian Gray. Now, I mention these because they weren't included in any of the homeschool recommendations, on a list you get for possible extra reading material when you buy the box curriculum. These things were not in there. But because I knew their value, I included them in Portrait of Dorian Gray. I believe it was made into a movie, but I also had the book. But it was about a young man in the 1800s, and I think I'm attracted to movies because it's usually the Victorian era, and I get to see the Victorian costumes. But the Portrait of Dorian Gray was a beautiful, handsome young man who was so handsome that a portrait artist painted his portrait, and he was so proud of himself, and he was so popular and loved. But he got engaged to a woman, and then he jilted her. And in those days, that was defrauding, and you just were never trusted again, and it was like the end of your career and the end of any kind of social advantage you would have. And but he didn't repent. He wasn't sorry. And then he went on to also make bad business deals and gyp people, and it didn't affect his conscience. But he would go home and he would look at his portrait. In the mirror, he was still a beautiful young man. He had no flaws on his face, and he was very handsome, very attractive. But he would look at his painting, and the painting started to develop scars on it, and deep blemishes on the face. And every time he didn't repent, this painting got another blot on it. And so this was just to indicate that even though you might be happy and you might be very pretty, your soul might be being harmed and blackened. And if you don't repent, well, that's a terrible state to be in, because after a while you can't even live with yourself, and that you can make your soul pure again by repenting and doing what is right. And so even though there was no religion in this, I believe that there was a great message in it, and that a Christian parent could probably discuss it before and afterwards to show the main point of it. The other one was, now I don't know if there was any immodesty in this, because it was a Victorian setting, and it was called the Pallisers, and there might have been a couple of costumes that wouldn't have been appropriate. You could watch it through first, and I think there were probably 28 episodes, and it was this saga of a family in the 1800s and all the things they went through with the decisions that they made. And there was one particular situation in one episode where a young man just kind of came out of nowhere, and he was charming, and he wanted to marry this man's daughter, one of the Pallisers, and he promised everything, but then he kept having to borrow money and getting deeper and deeper into debt and getting into more and more trouble, making more and more excuses. And that is exactly what happens today, isn't it? After someone has spent someone else's fortune. Then they make more and more excuses, and they go on to someone else and find someone else, attach themselves to someone else who can bail them out of everything, and they never learn to be careful with their living, and they never earn a living. So, but this is just, if you want, but of course you can see this in Wives and Daughters, this kind of thing in Wives and Daughters, because Mr. Preston was someone that people were warning Molly about and warning Cynthia about. And so all these people were in there, and of course in the Bible is full of them. If we could only see, this is not the worst time to be alive in the history of time, because all these, there's nothing new under the sun, and all these people, these kinds, have existed. All the bad characters have existed, and all the good ones. And so, but we need to know these stories so that we don't think that the world is impossible to deal with, that life is impossible to deal with, because other people have felt the same way throughout time. And now, as far as Jane Austen goes, this is part of my homeschool part. I'm homeschooling you. As far as Jane Austen goes, I liked all of the novels. Everyone's asking me which ones did you like and which ones you didn't. But was a little bit put off by Mansfield Park and Northanger Abbey. They seemed more like the books that the likes of the Bronte sisters would have written, and I don't care for them at all. But for some reason, I find them rather spooky, and I just couldn't warm to those at all. And I don't know, I just, and I don't think that I'm as fond of them, not one bit. I don't even know the characters as well as I do in the other ones. I don't even know anything to quote out of them like I do in Emma and Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice. Like, we could have a Jane Austen quote day at my house all day. We could have an all day. We could dress up in the costumes and everything, and just speak to each other in Austenese for everything. I mean, including my narrow hall back there. You know, if we were scooting past each other, we could say, "Other way, Mr. Collins." Because I have friends that we all know all these quotes, but not from Northanger Abbey or Mansfield Park. Those are very good moral lessons, I'll have to say, but I think they would be for older people, maybe children in their 20s or 30s. I really didn't think they were very appealing for young people. And one thing that I like about all of these is they're all about ordinary life and the same problems that we have no matter what era we live in. So I hope you're getting something done while you listen. And I wanted to tell you about how when you live the quiet life at home and you try to do deliberate things like wash a dish by hand, iron something, knit something, sew something, read something, go for a walk in your house, and all these little things, when you do that, then there's no need for guided imagery. I had an injury one time that I needed help with, and I went to a physical therapist, and they take you through stretches and moves, to try to loosen up your joints and get rid of pain. And they also included in this class a guided imagery session, which I'd never heard of before, but it was interesting how the guided imagery was so boring compared to what we already have. I already have a place to go for a walk, and like one of them was, imagine yourself walking in a nice place with trees all around. Well, I already do that. Or sitting around with a nice family and talking. Or, eating your favorite meal. We don't really need guided imagery when we start living the life at home. You don't need that because you're living it. And all these little things that they were mentioning, if you ever get a chance, go online and find a guided imagery lesson, or the instructor usually stands there and reads it, while you breathe or rest on your pallet, and go and read it. You'll be quite amused because you don't need it. especially those of you who have a cat, because that was one of the things in the guided imagery recitation that this teacher was doing, and it was, this soft cat that came and sat on your lap, and I was quite amused by the whole thing. So now it is getting darker, and I am working on one thing that maybe you would like to join me in, and that is to welcome the darker hours of the day as much as we welcome the early hours of the day. Sometimes those can get a little depressing, and so we need to go back to how people used to do things in the old days. In the evenings, they'd light their lamp. Maybe they would visit a little bit, or maybe they would bathe. I had a book called The Art of the Bath, and it had all these different nationalities and how the scented baths that they used, and the types of water, and the healing baths and things like that, and was thinking that sometimes modern life is so fast that we don't stop and think about these little things, and do things more slowly. And so towards the evening, that's when we want to slow down. I'm going to end by there are a couple of things I want to talk to you about. One was, as I was going through my old books, I found a book on an author named Barbara Cartland, and she was famous for wearing this color pink. And I decided I wasn't going to keep it, but I found a quote in it that I quite liked, and I wanted to be sure that I read this. Because she was unique. Now, I don't know what her dates was, but she was the mother of the wife of Princess Diana's father, the second wife of Princess Diana's father. She was the mother. And she was a novelist, and she wrote many novels and many books, and she even wrote some health books. And you wouldn't have heard of her so much in the U.S. because she was British, and her books were sold all over the British Empire and the Commonwealths. So you wouldn't have known who she was. But she wrote clean novels. And when the 60s approached and the permissiveness era approached, people were writing novels that weren't fit to be read. They were not family oriented, and they were very explicit. And she was quite disgusted about it. And so her publishers were noticing that her sales were down, and she was being encouraged by other people to just get into the modern world and write about modern people and in the new permissive era, and just write novels about that. But in her novels, they always ended up real clean with a couple getting married. So she said she was noticing clear signs in the sales of her books. It says here, they called it the swinging 60s, and she said she had declined, and they wanted her to change the way she wrote and get with it, otherwise her sales and her whole career was going to die, and she declined. It says it was not merely that she found the whole idea distasteful, which she did, but also she felt perceptively that there would be a powerful reaction before long to the whole ethos of the new liberality. And she said already as the 60s ended, she was noticing clear signs of this in the sales of her books. Her publisher did not appear to notice, but Barbara had always made a point of studying the figures of her sales around the world, and had already seen what seemed to be an interesting phenomenon. And she said if her English publishers were right, the one place where her sales should be falling off was in the Western world's most liberated countries, namely Scandinavia, for the Scandinavians had been in the forefront of almost everything of which Barbara disapproved: equality, permissiveness, women's lib, and other things, but curiously the exact opposite was happening. Instead of declining, Barbara's Scandinavian sales were booming. The world's most liberated women wanted to read about real romance, and Barbara's dukes and princesses. After the liberation of the 60s, the backlash had begun. And Barbara was very down-to-earth about it all. It was perfectly obvious to me, she said, at any rate, that people would soon get bored to death with this permissiveness, and certainly women don't want to go on reading about it forever. Apart from the fact that it degrades us, most of it is absurdly exaggerated and untrue. I'm convinced, she said. So what happened was, with all this pressure, and see, this is how we can learn from people who are real innovative. All this pressure of her to change the themes of all her books, she decided that if she could not write about normal life in the 1960s, which was an extremely permissive era, she said she would just go back into history. So she did a lot of research, and she learned about the knights and the ladies and the castles, and she just created books all about that. And that way no one could fault her, because she knew that in those days people had to behave honorably and wouldn't have tolerated the permissiveness. So she was very smart. She just went back into that era. I think that's why it's so enjoyable to have people over and do reenactments. Like we do pioneer reenactments, and we also do Victorian reenactments, and we sometimes have special meals that represent the era that we're interested in, and why it's so interesting to go back in time and do things the way they did them before. And that's why I tell you, if you ever get online and you want to know more about the slow life, then just go into the little section and type in slow living or slow life, and a lot of videos will come up of people who are learning about the simplest little things, like picking wildflowers, and they'll record the experience, and they will take pictures, and they will talk about it on a video. And just these simple things. We're not different. We're not so advanced that we don't have a heart for these simple things of creation that God made, and we are not so intellectual that it's beneath us. And so we do need to practice these simple things. The Bible even speaks of it. Now I want to read from the book called Mrs. Dunwoody's Excellent Instructions for Homekeeping, which I like so far. So I want to just read her introduction. Last time I just skipped into something else, but I want to read her introduction because I think you'll enjoy this. Dear reader, what was an evening at home like 100 years ago? A simple homemade dinner enjoyed by the entire family at the kitchen table, where stories were told, lives were shared, and everyone listened to each other intently. Sometime I want to take a little time and tell you what I have found effective on Zoom, sometimes when I can't see my descendants in person, what I will say to them or ask them on Zoom that will help make the call extremely quality and worth sitting through. Is probably even better sometimes than a visit, because every minute counts. This was followed by adjournment to the living room for games or study or reading by the firelight, and then early to bed, for the candle had faded and the day had turned to night. That's another interesting and enjoyable thing to do, is if it's safe to have candles in safe jars where you can learn what it's like for the daylight to go away and to go to bed naturally and not have the electric lights on, and see how much better rest you get as you go to bed early. Fast forward to today, where speed is everything. A phone company promises to save you 3 seconds on your precious time to reach your caller. We fill our time with mindless television shows and are bombarded with advertisements appearing on buses, billboards, and t-shirts. In the grocery store, at the office, in traffic, in our homes, even in our microwaves, everything is fast and furious. It's as if we are under secret orders to go and consume and live at the fastest pace possible. Our grandparents knew something we have forgotten. Good things take time. Love is slow and lasts. Tenderness takes patience. Wisdom comes with age. And the tall, majestic oak tree outside of my window took 80 years to reach its glorious height. In the length of days comes understanding. Someone once said, when an old person dies, a library is lost. Isn't that interesting? All that information, all their ideas, all the things that they have thought of, and can impart to you is gone. Yes, we feel it, don't we, when our loved ones dies. All those things that I wanted to ask my father and mother, I'll never hear them. I'll never find out. Some things, there's no way to find them, because when an old person dies, a library is gone. That is so true. How true, and yet we are too busy zooming into tomorrow to take time to look and listen to the past. Unlike our grandparents, we seem to be too distracted by life to take time to teach and pass on our wisdom from one generation to the next. Mrs. Dunwoody's excellent instructions for homekeeping will help fill that void. This book is fashioned after the traditional notes 19th century Southern women penned as a record of all they knew and thought meaningful. Practical and simple, reliable and trustworthy, these receipt books included everything from the nuts and bolts of day-to-day living to the rules of decent behavior in both company and conversation. These books were treasured and passed from one generation to the next. Part of what makes them so special is that most of what these women wrote is timeless and still very applicable today. I'm still trying to think what the name of those copybooks were. I've spoken to you several times of them, the copybooks that people left behind, and they were commonplace. I think they were called commonplace books, and they were. George Washington had one, and there's where he wrote his 13 rules of polite conduct, and everyone should have one so that you could just pleasantly copy something, not in a hurry, but just copy something that you like into them so that your children will know what you liked and what was important to you. And that's where these art journals and mini journals come along. These days, Mrs. Dunwoody's excellent instructions for homekeeping was written to provide today's reader with the advice and wisdom typical of these receipt books, practical information often forgotten or not explicitly explained, such as how to care for the sick, which seems to be such a common-sense information that no one today thinks to teach others how to do it. Yes, I remember going to a class, I must have been about 16, and learning how to care for someone at home who's recovering from something at home, how to care for them, how to make them comfortable, how to keep their bedding clean, how to make a little table for them to have their food on, or to provide reading material, how to take care of a sick child, and how these things helped so much for people to get well. Because one of the things we know is that if you're ever ill, your mind becomes weaker too, and you can sink into a depression. And caring for the sick took that into consideration also. And so these days, as people spend less and less time at home, more of us are turning to outside services to meet our basic needs, such as food, laundry, cleaning, comfort, entertainment, and social interaction. Yes, we've outsourced everything. We've outsourced ourselves, when actually at the home, in the home, the people in the home, not just the homemaker, are capable of providing all these things: the food, laundry, cleaning, comfort, and entertainment. And I still remember growing up where we created our own entertainment, and how our parents encouraged us to do that. This reduces the chances of our homes nurturing us and being a source of comfort and contentment. May I suggest that if you do not feel comfortable in your home and that you are not feeling nurtured in your home, that you feel uneasy, that it could be for lack of developing these things and these services. Is everything neat and tidy and clean and put away? Is your refrigerator clean? Have you been to the grocery store? Are the menus planned? Have you got your clothes laid out for the next day? You might want to turn to Fly Lady and get engaged in that because you can find a schedule, an everyday schedule there that you might want to follow till you develop something that suits you better. It's nice to follow some experts. I did that with homeschooling. At first I ordered a boxed curriculum and I followed it, and then I found flaws in it, and then I discovered what we didn't like and what the children did well with, and so we decided just to order other things that we liked, and we would choose things that were not in a set. And well, this is the same thing with a homekeeping schedule. You might want to find something online that has a schedule and follow it until you develop something that you like better or something of your own, just to get the idea. It's a training. Our homes are more beautiful, expensive, and luxurious than ever, with more material goods and conveniences than Mrs. Dunwoody could ever imagine. We pay more for them and spend less time in them, and so homekeeping, as she defined it, seems to be a lost art and not a very important one anymore. As you read Mrs. Dunwoody's advice, perhaps you will begin to feel a little daunted by her effortless perfection and tireless attention to every detail. But don't despair, dear reader, for Mrs. Dunwoody is actually a character based on my great-grandmother and other inspiring Southern women who held the art of homemaking sacred. If we view Mrs. Dunwoody as a source of inspiration, rather than a yardstick to measure ourselves by, we suddenly become more like her than we ever thought possible. In fact, after looking through several of these receipt books and reading and sifting through my own family papers, I can imagine her to be as real as any willful, charming Southern belle could ever be. Now, I'm combining that with what I was telling you about Barbara Cartland. Was what she did is she took a situation, an era that she was living in that just probably horrified her, and she used it as an opportunity to go back to some simpler kind of life and some more beautiful types of clothing, and inspired her to use that situation. And we can do that today because, yes, we're all living in trying times, but perhaps we can use them in a very creative and innovative way, creating more services for each other at home, or just ideas, and discussing ideas how to make life more pleasant for each other and make it easy to do what is good and what is right, and how to use our talents. Perhaps we can maybe even do better than we would have before there were all these political trials. So ladies, I hope that you have enjoyed this enough and gotten a few things done, and I'm going to try to make it here in the daylight someday. But my day has just been crazy, and I've had so much to do and not done as much as I wanted, but I was determined I was going to leave you a lesson tonight, and so I hope that you got a lot done while you worked, and God bless you. Stay close to Christ, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.